And indeed, the Chinese Communist Party, in their own constitution, they made it clear that the party leads everything. And the so-called Great Leap Forward is essentially changing the Chinese institution from a completely Soviet type of totalitarianism into a totalitarianism with Chinese characteristics. It's still totalitarianism in the sense that the party controls everything. However, Mao believes that I only need to control everything strategically. Actually, in the book, a huge question I want to address is to understand why communism is so appealing. If we look at the historical facts, then the fact is that it is originated from Christianity.
The Inspire Us podcast.
We in the West have had this impression that the system of democracy has been what has led to such economic prosperity. But then we look at China and it seems to put in question that theory. What can we learn and what should we know about the system that they have over there? And how has this regime been able to maintain such economic stride?
Okay. Actually, here, let's start from some statistics because those basic statistics are going to tell us the situation pretty well. So if you started from a belief or observation that democracy would bring us to prosperity. If we look at the statistics, that is actually true. So if we look at all developed economies, excluding some very small city-states or oil-rich areas, excluding this, then there's no exception that all developed economies are democracies. So that's the basic fact. And then you talked about China. So indeed, it's true that in recent 4 decades, China had a sustained high growth rate. And this high growth rate is kind of a surprise to many others. And because of the high growth rate, people thought that China is already a developed economy or rich nation. But if we look at the statistics in terms of per capita GDP, then China is actually about the average of the global economy. Or if we compare China with the United States, and then if we are using nominal GDP, then the Chinese per capita GDP is only 1/5 or even 1/6 of the United States. If we look at the purchasing power as a comparison, then in terms of purchasing power parity, then the Chinese per capita GDP is well below 1/3 of the US level. So to be safe, it's 1/4 of the United States. So in that standard, it's not a developed economy. And China currently is already falling into stagnation. So basically the fast growth period is over. That is related to its institution being non-democracy.
So it's reached a barrier, a cap.
Yeah. So the major barriers its institution itself is related to its non-democracy features.
And so do you think that because it's related to its non-democracy features, we're going to see a lot of pressure on the regime that they have now?
Indeed, there are lots of pressures. However, because this institution, which actually is a totalitarianism, is repressive. So although there are pressures, but they using all kinds of means to contain dissidents. So many of the pressures would not be expressed.
Could you explain a little bit for us what is the regime that they have over there? Because some people, we look at it from afar. We've never been to China, so we can see, okay, is it a dictatorship? How what's going on there? And then we've spoken to some economists that they've explained to us how they found a lot of success by having different regions be led by individuals, and that has, this local approach has gained a lot of benefit. But so, what is the system they have over there?
Right. So here, really, the key is that the reason I describe that as a totalitarianism is because the key actor or the ruler is the party, is the Communist Party. The Communist Party controls whole society. That's the key. So what do I mean by a Communist Party controls whole society? So the first of all, people may care about the legislature, but actually there is no legislature. There is a nominal legislature. The legislature is the party's legislature. Means that everyone in the legislature have to get their position from the party.
Mhm.
And then people care about the court. And the court is a party's court. The party controls the court. It's a top-down. The party completely controls the court. And then how about armed forces? The armed forces, they are the party's armed forces. So
Mhm.
it belongs to the party. And then how about all kinds of organizations, the media? The media is the party's media. All organizations are controlled by the party. For example, even churches, temples, all of those are controlled by the party. And all NGOs, civil societies, the party controls all of them. And businesses, including private business, the party controls businesses. So the party controls everything. And nowadays, data, the big data, the party controls the data. So the party controls everything. So in that way, that is a totalitarian regime. And indeed, the Chinese Communist Party, in their own constitution, they made it clear that the party leads everything. So in their original Chinese word, what they said is 党政居民学东南西北中党是领导一切的. So in these Chinese words, they have talked about everything. So essentially, they said everything is controlled by the party.
What do you think? What specific thing do you think about Chinese history or culture that makes it drawn to totalitarianism?
Oh, very good question. Right. Actually, yeah, indeed, this communist totalitarianism is not Chinese, not native Chinese institution.
So it's not. It doesn't. It's not.
Not
There's
Chinese,
nothing Chinese about it.
not history. So this comes from Soviet Russia. So the Russia had in 1917 had this October Revolution. Since then, the Communist Party controlled the whole Russia empire, and then they expanded. So right after establishing Soviet Union in the Russia Empire, they established a missionary organization, a missionary agency called Communist International, in short called Comintern. So the Comintern came to China in 1920. And then they established the Comintern's China branch. And this branch is called Chinese Communist Party, which rules China today. So this is a Russian imported from Russia. And all modern institutions in China are transplantations of institutions from Soviet Union. So it took quite a long time. So the first regime which they established was in 1931. And that regime is called the Chinese Soviet Republic. And today's PRC is just an extension of the Chinese Soviet Republic. So by 1957, from 1931 up to 1957, took them quite a long time to convert the Chinese institution into Soviet type. And then the Chinese communists changed the institution after 1957. So that becomes what we have seen today. So earlier you mentioned about the local party state agencies, the local party state authorities have played lots of roles. So today when Western observers come into China, what they observe looks like something quite striking, that you have provinces, cities, counties, all different kinds of local party state authorities play important roles, take initiatives, develop the local economy. So it looks like this is a thriving model. But actually, when they observe that part of China, it's true. That is an important part of China. They forget that all of these local party state agencies have to follow their bosses. So this is a uniform. This is a hierarchy. It's a top-down hierarchy, and all of them are appointed above, and they are accountable only to their bosses. That's the key.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about Mao's legacy.
Right.
Because there's an economist that I follow. His name is Richard Wolff. He associates or attributes a lot of China's success today to Mao. And here in the West, we only hear about the atrocities and the amount of people who were killed under his regime. But do you think there's some truth in that? Do you think Mao is responsible, or he laid the groundworks for China to be successful?
Okay, so then, let me explain what happened since 1958. Mao died in 1976. So anything before 1976 was intimately related to him. So he was the Chinese Communist Party's head since the late 1930s. Before the late 1930s, all the Communist parties' heads were appointed by Moscow. And Mao also got his position with the recognition of Moscow. Anyhow, so what happened in 1958 is that at that time, he was trying to compete against the Soviet Union. When we talk about the Soviet Union at that time, people may recall a quite colorful history that Khrushchev made an announcement in the UN in New York that socialism is going to surpass capitalism. Socialism is going to bury capitalism by outcompeting capitalism. So we are going to grow faster than you. So after all, once we surpass you, then you have to convert into socialism. So that was what Khrushchev had announced in New York. And the Chinese Communist Party wanted to grow even faster than Soviet Union. But the Chinese institution was implanted from Soviet Union. So, but how could we Chinese grow faster than them if we have the same institutions? Then Mao thought that the key is incentives. So then how to motivate, so how to give incentives, how to motivate different levels of authorities. So that was in his mind. So then he launched this so-called Great Leap Forward. And the so-called Great Leap Forward is essentially changing the Chinese institution from a completely Soviet type of totalitarianism into a totalitarianism with Chinese characteristics. It's still totalitarianism in the sense that the party controls everything. However, Mao believes that I only need to control everything strategically. I don't need to control technical things. So the only thing I need is that you must loyal to me. And when you're loyal to me, and I want you to go further in terms of growth rate, but how to go further, I don't care. You solve it. That's your problem. So whoever can achieve that is going to get a promotion. So that's the regime in his mind. So then he delegated most of the state assets from the central ministries into different levels of local authorities. So that was the Great Leap Forward. But that actually, on the one hand, they abolished all markets. On the other hand, they abolished the central planning, because the so-called central planning essentially means that you need all ministries to implement. But when you delegate all the state assets from the central ministries to the local levels, then the ministries cannot implement planning anymore. So without market, without central planning, that was a total chaos. So then there was a huge famine. In that famine, about 40 million people died. This is the worst, absolutely the worst famine in human history. So you have a huge amount of literature documenting this famine. And that is why overwhelmingly when people talk about the Great Leap Forward, people talk about the famine. That is true. So because of the famine, this change from Soviet type of totalitarianism into the Chinese type had to be stopped because of the famine. But then right after a temporary recovery, starting from 1966, Mao launched the second wave of moving in that direction. That is, the name is called Cultural Revolution. But if we focus on changing institutions, so it was the Cultural Revolution which consolidated and strengthened this new type of institution, which I called regionally administered totalitarianism. And that turns out becomes the foundational institution for the later economic reform. So in the later economic reform, the key is regional competition. And the reason the Chinese Communist Party could rely on regional competition to push for growth is the foundational base is laid down by the Mao era.
Okay, so there is some truth in that.
Partly, yeah. But if someone said that everything is due to Mao, that's not most Chinese would not accept. Yeah. But this part, if we talk about the institution, yes, the institution, yes, is evolved in that way, yes.
Okay. Interesting. Another thing I actually really wanted to ask you about is you have this video where you say that communism is a product of Christianity, and you talk about the comparison between Confucianism versus Christianity, and I think you went into depth about it in your latest book. I just wanted to ask you, since we've got you here in person, to explain that comparison you made and why it's important.
Okay, right. So I have a whole chapter. It's a quite long chapter in my book for this issue, for the emergence of communist totalitarianism. So here, actually, in the book, a huge question I want to address is to understand why communism is so appealing. So some people with an anti-communist attitude may hate what I have said, but this is a matter of fact. So the reason the communist totalitarianism could conquer conquer the countries which include 1/3 of the world population is because it was appealing to many. So not only in those nations where the communism conquered, but even including in the West, is even today still to many is appealing. So we have to face this issue. So why it is appealing? So actually here, really the key is the origin. The origin, if we trace that back, if we look at the historical facts, then the fact is that it is originated from Christianity. So in what sense? So then here we have to be careful. Where I'm not equating Christianity with communism. I'm only saying that you find the origin. And this origin explains why it's so appealing. Actually, it's more than Christianity. It's from Judaism. So starting from the Judaism, a important a kind of attitude or ideology is equality. It's absolute equality. And in particular, if we look at the practice of Jesus, the practice of Jesus is that all the followers, including himself and all his followers, would donate everything they have to their own communities. So within each community, within each Christian community, here we are talking about the early Christianity. In the early Christianity, in each Christian community, the wealth is going to be shared by the whole community. That is a very basic, a fundamental belief. That belief is the starting point. And that belief is appealing. It's appealing not only to the poor, it's appealing to all the humanities, so including the wealthy. So that's why Christianity was so powerful. And you have many wealthy people join the community, and they voluntarily donate their wealth. So that was the original idea. But the original idea was sort of buried by the Catholic Church. Since the Catholic Church was created by the Roman Empire, it was a state church. As a state church, it became very rich, luxurious. And so then it was the Reformation. The Reformation changed everything. So during the Reformation, Martin Luther came back to the original Christianity, looking at the original Christianity where people suppose looking for equality. So then it's kind of a rebirth of Christianity since then. But then within this movement of Reformation, there was a very radical group. Yeah, so I would not mention them, but I don't want to cause troubles since I don't mean to humiliate anyone. So there was a very, very radical group within the rebellions, and they actually distorted the original idea. The original Christian idea is a peaceful, voluntary, absolute equality. So if you truly believe Christianity, if you believe Christianity to the degree just like Jesus or like Jesus, his close followers, then if you follow completely, then you donate everything. But that's voluntary. So you and me may have different understanding of Christianity. So you may donate everything. I may donate half of what I have, right? So, but perhaps I'm rich, donating half is good enough from many eyes, right? But anyhow, that's voluntary. But from this radical group, they believe that everyone must donate everything. And there should not exist personal wealth. And indeed, they implemented it. And the implementation was very brutal. So that was the first, in human history, that was the first communist totalitarianism. So that was in the 16th century. Right. So, and then this whole thing was translated from Christian communism into secular communism by a French priest in the Catholic Church. His name is Jean Malier. Jean Malier nominally was a priest, but actually he was not. Actually, he did not believe the existence of God. So he was a secular. So secretly, he wrote this book, and this book laid down the foundation, translated all the Christian, so, as I mentioned, so this emerged in the Reformation by a radical group, and he believed that. And also, he didn't believe God. So, but turns out he was hugely influential. So his influence was due to Voltaire and Rousseau. And Rousseau further developed the theory. And the theory developed by Rousseau was that theory influenced Karl Marx. So Karl Marx essentially learned from there. So that's the origin. And that is why it's so powerful, because many of those expressions are actually linked to the Bible. So when it's linked to the Bible, it's appealing. And also, human beings love the idea of equality.
Yeah. So I'm sure it's hard to gauge, but do you think we can say China has lost its way? Do you think it still wants to be egalitarian? Because, I mean, it doesn't even have a robust welfare system. So just looking at it, can we say that it doesn't truly want to be communist anymore?
It's a great question. This is truly a great question. Right. So to answer this question, we have to come back to Marxism. So what is Marxism? So the appealing part of Marxism is egalitarianism. So egalitarianism alone is good enough to be appealing. But Karl Marx actually in the middle and the late 19th century, in that era, everyone believes science. So Karl Marx wanted to have a science, to have a scientific prediction and scientific analysis of the existing society and the prediction of the future. he thought he was Newton. So he wanted to do more than Molière or Rousseau. So then basically he draw important conclusions from many rounds of revolutions in France. So based upon his observations of French revolutions, including his contemporary revolutions, he drew a conclusion that, so basically his argument is that communism is inevitable. Or put this way, capitalism will inevitably collapse, and communism inevitably, the whole human society would enter communism. Or by the way, this kind of argument is also in parallel to the Bible. So to the Bible, you have the end of the old world, and then when Jesus come back, we enter a new world. So in parallel to that, that's Marxist prediction. And then here, the key issue is how to enter communism. So then he concluded that it's going to have 2 stages. So the first stage is called socialism. And then afterwards, you enter the second stage. So then here, what is a communism and what is a socialism? So communism is a classless society. But before entering that, up to capitalism, these are class societies. And in all class societies, you have a ruling class and you have ruled classes. And all the classes, in all class societies, there's no democracy. Democracy is a cheating. So the only thing you have is dictatorship. So in a capitalist society, you have bourgeoisie's dictatorship. So then, how to destroy a capitalist society? The only way you can do it is violence. So you use violence, destroy the capitalist society, and then you establish what he called the dictatorship of proletariat. So the proletariat dictatorship is the first stage of communism. So in that stage, you still have classes because you only enter, you try to destroy, you try to eliminate all classes. So you enter the first stage. So here, really the key is the proletariat dictatorship. This is the most important invention of Karl Marx. So here, this is not my personal judgment. This is the judgment by Karl Marx himself. So in his later years, he wrote that down. He said, my major contribution is the invention of proletariat dictatorship. So then come back to your question. So what the Chinese Communist Party is doing, what they are believing. So supposedly, as a Communist Party, supposedly the ultimate goal of a Communist Party is egalitarianism. But actually, the Communist Party is a organization with a goal of executing proletariat dictatorship. So this is invented by Lenin. That's why here I emphasize that the Chinese institution is imported from Soviet Russia. This is an invention of Lenin. So Karl Marx didn't know how to do this. What Karl Marx talked about is abstract. It's an abstract idea that you have to have a brutal force to crush capitalism, and then you have to have a brutal force to rule, to eliminate all classes, and then you enter communism. So here, all the brutalities in destruction and then reconstruction, all of this were in Méliès. That's why I emphasize the root of this stuff. So the root from Méliès, and Méliès was learned from the medieval Reformation. So he saw that. So in his book, he said, to achieve this egalitarianism, we have to kill. So we have to start from killing. We have to kill the kings. We have to kill the nobilities. We have to kill the rich. Otherwise, how could they donate their wealth? So we need their wealth. The only way to get their wealth is to kill. So this is nothing new, really something new, just like Karl Marx said he himself, that the invention is a proletariat dictatorship. And so then coming back to Chinese Communist Party, what is their doing, what is their belief, what is their institution, just like what in their constitution. So in their constitution, they made it clear that they are, so this constitution is about a proletariat dictatorship.
I guess it's just doesn't really look like that from the outside. But yeah, okay, very interesting. But what about Confucian? What does he represent to the Chinese people, to the Chinese government? What's his impact? Because I have a very surface level understanding of him. But
right, yeah, Confucianism is a so if we are talking about institutions rather than philosophy, then as a major content of institutions, then the Confucianism is a sort of a man-made official ideology in the Chinese Empire, but not the communist regime. So under the Chinese communist regime, Confucianism is not the official ideology. So that, what do I mean by official ideology for the Chinese Empire? So the key element of Confucianism is hierarchy. So everyone is born within the hierarchy, and you identify where you are, and you must obey your bosses. So this is the, so if I have to summarize Confucianism into just one word, that's it. Hierarchy, obeying, and no challenge, no question. So even no question within your mind. So within your mind, you just obey blindly. That is the education. That is the belief.
okay, interesting. I guess you could say perhaps that's why the CCP are able to exert the control over the region.
Good. That's a part of it. Yeah. So traditionally, even before the Chinese Communist Party has been established, the Chinese tradition for everyone being educated, once you learn how to read, what you are reading is about this. So what they are saying is that within the family, the father rules. Between husband and wife, the husband rules. So within the country, the emperor rules. so on and so forth. So you have a hierarchy.
And do you think that's a good or bad thing?
From so nowadays we believe liberalism. So from the point of view of liberalism, this is against liberalism. So it's more absolute than the situation within an absolute monarchy.
And you mentioned that there was this second wave with the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah, yeah.
Why was that more successful than the original Great Leap Forward? What happened next is that it was able to implement this change that you call regionally administered totalitarianism?
Oh, good. Right. So, yeah. So, in the second wave, when they pushed the Cultural Revolution, um, actually, since after the first wave, the Chinese institution has already been changed. Most of the assets have been already delegated to the localities. So therefore, during the Cultural Revolution, the central ministries were all collapsed. Yeah, so that's a basic fact. The basic fact is that in 1967 up to 68, all the central ministries collapsed. There was no function. And these central ministries staff were all sent to the countryside to do the agricultural work. However, you don't see similar chaos like in the Great Leap Forward. The reason is simply because at that time, all the localities were already on their own. So they don't need central ministries coordination. Even before the Cultural Revolution, they already didn't rely much on the central ministries anymore. So that is one of the most important reasons that although the Cultural Revolution was very brutal, and it's very chaos. And in 1968, actually, there were many civil wars.
Really?
Yeah, literally civil wars. And so actually, there was a live recording of Deng Xiaoping when he received a Italian journalist asking him about his views of a cultural revolution and how he survived the cultural revolution. So in that interview, he said he made it clear that the cultural revolution was a civil war. There must be there is an English version. I'm not sure there is a French version. So there's an English version. So you can find that. So in his word, it was a civil war. But in any case, because all localities were sort of on their own. But still here, you don't get confused believing that they are really on their own. No, this is not the case. So in terms of party line, in terms of ideology, and most important strategies, even personnel matters, all of these are centrally controlled. All of these are top-down. But in terms of concrete administration matters, resource allocation, all of those are decided locally. And that actually made them survivable.
I think Alex and I have had many conversations with people about Xi Jinping and if perhaps he's being too controlling and he's centralizing too much and reversing all of the good liberalization policies of the Deng Xiaoping era. Do you agree that he's doing this, or how do you assess his policy?
Okay, right. In terms of, if we compare him with Deng Xiaoping, then we have to say that in terms of the ultimate goal, the purpose, they are the same. The purpose is to maintain Communist Party's rule. But in terms of pragmatic policies, they are not the same. but I would not say that they are completely different. So when we compare them, we have to compare the different era. We are comparing different era. So the Deng Xiaoping era is the beginning of the reform. At that time, China was very poor. So in terms of per capita GDP, China was substantially poorer than Africa as a whole. So it's very, very poor. And Deng Xiaoping was pragmatic. He knew that if the Communist Party was not able to reform, not able to change the economy, then to sustain the rule is impossible. So that's a part of the story. Another part of the story is that in 1989, June the 4th, Deng Xiaoping made a huge decision to crack down the demonstrations in Beijing by using tanks. So he mobilized more than 200,000 troops with tanks, crushed the demonstrations. And he had a strong belief that once this is done, people are, so he created fear. So, and this fear, he believes that the fear can last decades. So then within the next decade, after this cracking down with this fear, and then he could focus on the economy. So the major launch of economic reform was after this, was 1992. And there is another important thing when we talk about 1992, is that in 1991, Soviet Union collapsed. So the collapse of Soviet Union was a big deal because not only Soviet Union collapsed, before that, in 1989, all the Central Eastern European communist regimes collapsed. And then 91, Soviet Union collapsed. So would next be Chinese? So they were deeply worried. So in that year, after the collapse of Soviet Union, Deng Xiaoping said, the reason Soviet Union collapsed was because of their failure in economic reform. So for surviving, he had to push for reform. But his purpose is clear. The purpose is for maintaining party rule. So in that aspect, Xi Jinping is the same. But Xi Jinping is at a different era. So in 2012, when Xi Jinping became the head of the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese president, the Chinese economy was already the second largest in the world. If we use purchasing power parity, then China was already the largest. It's already larger than the United States, which although China is not rich, not wealthy, but strong, right? It's strong enough to have enough resources investing in military. And indeed, nowadays, China indeed has a gigantic military. So that is why people thought they are so different. So, and Xi Jinping wanted, and also associated with this very fast growth in China, the growth was driven mainly by the private sector, but associated with the development of the private sector, there is a huge growing of the civil societies in China. And the civil societies means that people look for protections, look for freedom, and look for being more autonomous. But all of these are regarded as challenges to the party rule.
Okay. And Xi Jinping is getting quite old now, isn't he? And there are talks about his successor. But I just have no clue how the CCP sorts of work. Who is in the lineup? Who's being considered as the next leader? How does it actually work? What group of people can be considered? Like, do you
No,
know?
I don't know.
Is it a
No,
secret?
no one knows.
Nobody knows.
No one knows.
Oh, okay.
This is a secret.
Okay.
So first of all, there's no rule. Second, it's a top secret. So it's very likely that they don't know either. That's my hunch. Just look at what happened in 1976. So in 1976, Mao Zedong all of a sudden died. And 4 weeks after his death, his wife was under arrest. Means that was a coup d'etat. And then the whole thing developed after the coup d'etat. Which means that when he died, there was no proper arrangement whatsoever. There was a nominal arrangement that Hua Guofeng became the head of the party. But if that nominal arrangement was real, then there will be no need for the coup d'etat. So the coup d'etat was organized by Hua Guofeng. He was the nominal leader. Why a leader launch a coup d'etat to arrest the widow of Mao? Because the widow of Mao and her followers, they had real power.
And I wonder, just looking ahead, we were talking about the French Revolution and all these things, and it seems like there's a belief that for there to be a change of regime, there needs to be, protests that see blood. And I wonder, do you think there is possibility for peaceful transformation in China away from totalitarianism? Or will it have to see more extreme, things to have it changed?
Great question. Actually, I'm not able to predict. First of all, if we look at the history, then history tells us that there's no single case that a totalitarian regime could peacefully evolve into democracy. So first, you see Nazi Germany collapsed, fascist Italy collapsed, and militarist Japan collapsed, and communist regimes in Central Eastern Europe all collapsed first, and then reconstructed later. The same in Soviet Union. So history tells us that a peaceful evolution into democracy is impossible, but a peaceful collapsing is possible. So indeed, we see Central Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, all of those, except Romania, so all of those were peaceful. Even in the case of Romania, the bloodshed was very limited. So it's essentially a peaceful.
But it's scary to think about because with the globalized world, I think the collapse of China would be devastating to the whole world.
Okay. Then you think of the Soviet Union.
But it seems like Soviet Union we didn't have this globalized world. It was more divided and everyone was in their own bubble. While now it seems so much more, interconnected, especially with China.
Okay. Right. Yeah, when we when we when at that time Soviet Union was a superpower, not only at that particular time. So it had been superpower since after the Second World War. Around that time, militarily, Soviet Union in some areas were stronger than the United States. So overall, it was about equivalent. Economically, it was less so. You are correct that at that time there were two camps. But here, the important thing is that collapsing of the regime does not necessarily means that the economy collapse completely. So really here, the key is the collapse of the regime. And indeed, when the communist regimes collapsed in Central Eastern Europe and Soviet Union, most of the nations suffered hyperinflation. And the hyperinflation was not really caused by the collapse of the regimes. These were the problems accumulated in the past. The same is true in China. So China has accumulated huge problems, physical problems, financial problems. And if the regime collapsed, then all of this become observable. So currently, these are unobservable in the sense that these are only numbers. You don't see this in their daily life. And when people don't see this in daily life, people ignore that. And that is why in the West, most people believe that China was rich, China was strong, but they didn't know the very, very serious financial and physical problems there, just like the Soviet Union at their final years, just like that.
Professor Xu, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
This was an absolute pleasure and a privilege.
Yep, an absolute pleasure. Thank
And-
you ever so much for your time.
And you have your book, Institutional Genes, that should be out next month.
Right.
We advise everyone to check it out. And a really great conversation. Fascinating. I learned so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.